The world of Benjamin Croft was a very quiet one. It was a world of towering ceilings, of polished marble floors that echoed with every solitary footstep, and of vast empty rooms where the only sound was the soft hum of the central air conditioning. His home, a sprawling estate everyone called the Golden House, was less of a home and more of a beautiful, silent museum. Benjamin was the curator, the only exhibit, and the only visitor. His life was a neat and orderly schedule of business calls, financial reports, and silent meals prepared by a chef who left the food covered on a silver platter before disappearing. He was a king in a castle, but a castle with no one to share it with, and the throne was a very lonely chair indeed. On this particular Tuesday, the silence was supposed to be deeper than usual. Benjamin was meant to be thousands of miles away in a different city, in a different hotel room that looked exactly the same as all the others. But the big merger, the reason for his trip, had been settled with an unexpected handshake a full day early. Tired of hotel walls and the constant buzz of negotiations, Benjamin had instructed his pilot to fly him home immediately. He hadn't bothered to tell his head of staff, Mr. Albright, who coordinated things like cleaning schedules. All Benjamin wanted was the familiar, crushing silence of his own home and the deep, hot water of his personal bath to soak away the weariness of travel. Meanwhile, a world away from marble and silence, Charlotte Bell was tying her worn-in sneakers. Her world was one of bus schedules, packed lunches, and the cheerful, sometimes chaotic hustle of her cleaning crew. She worked for Gleam and Sparkle, a company trusted to care for the city's most expensive properties. Today's assignment was the legendary Golden House. It was a job they only got when the owner, the mysterious billionaire Benjamin Croft, was confirmed to be out of the country. The rules were strict, typed on a sheet of paper and underlined twice. Clean only the guest wing and the main entertaining areas. Do not, under any circumstances, enter the owner's private master suite. Mr. Croft values his privacy above all else. Charlotte was a good worker, careful and honest. But the Golden House was like a maze. After spending the morning dusting enormous portraits and vacuuming carpets softer than any bed she'd ever slept in, she needed to rinse out her cleaning cloth. The sink in the guest wing's powder room was tiny and ornate, and she was afraid of splashing water on the delicate gold faucet. She remembered passing a door that was slightly ajar, leading to what she thought was another guest bathroom. It was in fact the door to Benjamin Croft's private wing. Back in the master suite, Benjamin was already sinking into the steaming, lavender-scented water of his sunken bathtub. It was big enough for 5 people, carved from a single piece of white stone. He leaned his head back, closed his eyes, and let the heat seep into his bones, finally allowing the tension from his trip to begin to melt away. The steam fogged the air, creating a thick, hazy veil. Charlotte pushed the heavy door open and stepped into a room so large it made her gasp. It was dim, lit only by the gray afternoon light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The air was warm and smelled amazing, like rain and sandalwood. She tiptoed forward, her sneakers silent on the plush rug. Through the haze, she saw the glint of the massive bathtub. "Perfect," she whispered to herself, thinking this was the most fancy sink she had ever seen. She crept to the edge, the marble cool and slick under her fingertips. She leaned over, her cloth in hand, reaching for the hot water. That's when it happened. The marble edge was wet with condensation. Her fingers, damp from her work, lost their grip. There was no time to catch herself. With a small, startled yelp, she slipped. It wasn't a graceful stumble, it was a full, flailing, arms and legs everywhere plunge into the deep, hot water. The splash was enormous. A tidal wave that sloshed over the sides, soaking the rug and the floor. Benjamin's eyes flew open. For a single, confused second he thought the ceiling had caved in. Then he saw her. A woman, fully clothed in a simple t-shirt and jeans, was floundering in his bathtub, gasping and sputtering like a drowning cat. Water was everywhere. Shock, then a hot, swift surge of anger flooded him. This was his sanctuary. His one private place. "Who are you?" his voice boomed, cutting through the sound of sloshing water. It wasn't a question, it was a command. He stood up, water streaming from him, his face a mask of fury. "What are you doing in my house?" Charlotte was frozen, both from the shock of the fall and the terrifying sight of the very large, very angry man now standing over her. She scrambled backwards, slipping on the smooth bottom of the tub, her clothes heavy and clinging to her. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice shaking. "I'm with the cleaning crew. I got lost. I thought this was a sink." The words tumbled out, sounding ridiculous even to her own ears. She was humiliated, terrified, and sure she was about to be arrested. She finally managed to haul herself out of the tub, dripping a huge puddle onto the already soaked floor. She stood there, shivering uncontrollably, wrapping her arms around herself. She couldn't even look at him. This was it. She would be fired for sure and probably have to pay for the water damage to his fancy rug. Benjamin watched her. He saw the genuine terror in her wide eyes, the way her whole body trembled. He saw the utter, complete embarrassment on her face. The initial wave of anger receded, replaced by an unexpected and strange feeling. It was pity, perhaps, or maybe just the simple understanding of a truly honest accident. She wasn't a thief or an intruder. She was just a girl, lost and mortified in a house that was too big for its own good. He didn't say a word. He stepped out of the tub, grabbed the plushest, largest towel from a heated rack and walked over to her. He didn't hand it to her. In a gesture that was surprisingly gentle, he draped the warm, soft cotton over her trembling shoulders. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and calm, all the anger gone. "Go down to the kitchen," he said quietly. "It's down the main hall to the left. Tell the chef I said to make you a hot tea. Get warm." Charlotte stared at him, her mind unable to process this sudden shift. She just clutched the towel tighter, nodded mutely, and fled from the room, leaving a trail of wet footprints behind her. Benjamin stood alone in the wreckage of his bathroom, the silence of the house now feeling different. It was no longer just empty. It was interrupted. And for the first time in a very long time, the silence felt strangely alive. The following days in the Golden House settled into a new, unspoken rhythm. The grand, echoing halls no longer felt quite so empty, not because they were any less vast, but because a secret now lived within them, a shared moment that hummed just below the surface of everyday life. For Charlotte, returning to work was an exercise in sheer will. Every creak of a floorboard, every distant sound, made her heart jump into her throat. She expected at any moment to be pulled aside by her supervisor and fired on the spot. But the dismissal never came. Instead, a quiet directive filtered down from Mr. Albright. The cleaning crew was to continue their work as scheduled. There was no mention of the incident, no reprimand. It was as if the great splashy disaster had simply been absorbed by the house's immense silence. This unnerving calm was, in its own way, more confusing than any punishment. Benjamin, for his part, found his own thoughts returning to that damp, chaotic scene with a puzzling frequency. The memory should have been an irritant, a violation of his sacred privacy to be locked away and forgotten. Yet it was the look on her face that kept replaying in his mind, not the initial shock, but the raw, unguarded humiliation in her eyes just before he gave her the towel. It was a look he recognized, a feeling of being completely out of place, a sentiment he had spent a lifetime mastering but had never truly conquered. He found himself wandering the parts of the house where her crew was assigned, his ears subtly tuned to the sound of her voice, a soft, melodic sound he realized he could now distinguish from the others. Their first real conversation happened by a design that felt like an accident, even if some deep part of him had willed it into being. He was crossing the main gallery, a long room filled with expensive, emotionless modern art, when he saw her carefully dusting the base of a large, twisted metal sculpture. She was so focused on her task, her brow furrowed in concentration, that she didn't hear him approach. He cleared his throat and she jumped, nearly dropping her cloth. "It's hideous, isn't it?" he said, gesturing to the sculpture. The question was so blunt, so unlike the polite small talk he was accustomed to, that it surprised even him. Charlotte, her heart hammering, looked from the billionaire in his impeccably tailored suit to the twisted metal and back again. She knew she should just agree or say nothing at all. But her honesty, a reflex she couldn't always control, slipped out. "It looks like a pile of leftovers from a robot junkyard," she said, then immediately clapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. A sound escaped Benjamin then, a short, genuine bark of laughter that seemed to startle the very air in the room. He hadn't laughed like that, a real laugh from the stomach, in years. "A robot junkyard," he repeated, a real smile touching his eyes for the first time. "That's the most accurate review this thing has ever gotten. It cost more than a spaceship." In that moment, the invisible wall of money and status that separated them seemed to grow thin, almost transparent. He asked her name, though he had already looked it up in the staff files, just to hear her say it. That first crack in the dam led to a slow, steady trickle of encounters. Benjamin, the master of this entire domain, began to manufacture reasons to be where she was. He would ask her, with a formality that felt strangely intimate, if she wouldn't mind watering the delicate orchids on his private study balcony, a task far above her pay grade and strictly forbidden by her company. He would appear just as she was finishing for the day, claiming he needed a document fetched from the guesthouse library, a simple task that somehow required a 5-minute conversation about the weather, or the book she was secretly reading on her break. They were stolen moments, hidden in the shadows of the grand house, and this very secrecy gave them a thrilling, electric charge. Charlotte discovered a man who was nothing like the stern, untouchable figure of gossip. He was quiet, yes, but his questions were thoughtful. He asked about her life, her family, her dream of one day going to college to study botany, a passion born from tending her mother's small, crowded garden. She, in turn, learned that his world of private jets and business deals was also a cage of loneliness. He spoke of long, silent dinners and the pressure of always having to be the smartest, strongest person in the room. He confessed he couldn't remember the last time someone had told him a piece of their actual, honest mind, like her opinion on the robot junkyard sculpture. They were two puzzle pieces from entirely different boxes, and yet, somehow their edges were beginning to fit. The forbidden nature of it all was a constant, humming presence. A relationship between the billionaire owner and a woman from the cleaning crew was not just inappropriate. It was a transgression against the unspoken rules of his world. It was a scandal waiting to happen, a headline that would embarrass his board and provide fodder for his rivals. They both knew this. The knowledge hung between them, making every glance longer, every casual brush of hands more significant. It was a danger that made the heart beat faster, a shared secret that bound them tighter than any public declaration ever could. The spark, when it finally came, was as inevitable as it was gentle. It was late, the sun had long since set, and the golden house was bathed in the soft glow of discreet, recessed lighting. Charlotte was doing a final sweep of the guest house, ensuring everything was spotless for a visit from a business associate that, unbeknownst to her, Benjamin had already cancelled. He found her there in the small sitting room looking out at the moonlit garden. The air was still and warm. He didn't speak. He simply walked up to her and, his eyes never leaving hers, reached out and took her hand. It was the same hand that had slipped on his bathtub weeks ago. This time his fingers didn't recoil. They laced between hers, palm to palm, a perfect, warm fit. It was a question and an answer, all in one silent gesture. Then he leaned in, his movements slow, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met in a kiss that was not hungry or demanding, but soft, exploring, and filled with a tenderness that spoke of all the words they couldn't yet say. It was a secret kiss in a quiet room, a moment stolen from the world, and it held more truth and promise than any contract he had ever signed. When they finally parted, the silence in the house was no longer empty. It was full. It was alive with the beating of two hearts, finally in sync. The secret world Benjamin and Charlotte had built within the walls of the golden house was a fragile, beautiful thing, a glass orb of stolen moments and whispered dreams. For a few weeks, it felt utterly real and completely separate from the harsh, rule-bound world outside. Their love was a language spoken in quiet glances across a room, in hands that brushed while passing a book, and in the deep, peaceful silence they now shared on the study balcony, a silence that was no longer empty but filled with a profound and simple understanding. Charlotte's laughter began to echo in halls that had only known the sound of solemn footsteps, and Benjamin found the oppressive weight of his responsibilities felt lighter, as if her presence had somehow softened the very air he breathed. They existed in a perfect, private bubble, both knowing it couldn't last, yet desperately hoping it would. The pin that popped the bubble came in the form of a single sharp photograph. A junior executive, hoping to curry favor, had been staying late at the office, which had a direct view of Benjamin's private study balcony. He saw what others had only suspected. He saw the way Benjamin looked at the woman in the simple cleaning uniform, a look not of an employer, but of a man utterly, completely captivated. The photo, grainy but unmistakable, showed Benjamin gently tucking a stray strand of hair behind Charlotte's ear, his touch tender, his expression soft. It was not a picture of a scandalous affair, but of a genuine, deep affection, which, in the cold calculus of Benjamin's world, was somehow even more dangerous. The confrontation happened in Benjamin's office, a room all glass and steel, a stark contrast to the warmth that had been growing in his heart. Mr. Albright, along with two stern-faced members of the company's board, laid the photograph on his desk. Their words were not angry but coldly pragmatic, like a business proposal for a hostile takeover of his personal life. "Benjamin, this is untenable," one of them said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We have a reputation, a brand to uphold. The shareholders expect a certain stability. This dalliance makes you look weak, unpredictable." They presented him with an ultimatum, a choice as clean and brutal as a surgeon's cut. End the relationship with the cleaning girl immediately, or the board would be forced to take action. They would have her fired from Gleam and Sparkle, and they would ensure, through their considerable influence, that no other reputable cleaning service in the city would hire her. They would erase her professional life, all to protect the pristine image of his. Fear, cold and slick, coiled in Benjamin's stomach. It wasn't fear for himself or his fortune, but a terrifying, protective fear for Charlotte. He saw her bright future, her dream of school, her simple, honest life, being crushed under the weight of his world's ruthless machinery. In a moment of panic, he made a choice he believed was for her own good. He would push her away, make her hate him, so she would leave and be safe from their poison. That evening he found her in the garden. His face, which had only ever shown her kindness, was a mask of cold indifference. "This was a mistake, Charlotte," he said, his voice flat, each word feeling like a betrayal of his own soul. "It was a distraction. A foolish one. It's over." He told her it was inappropriate, that he had let things go too far, that he was ashamed of the unprofessionalism. He used every cold, corporate word he could think of to build a wall between them, watching as the light in her eyes shattered into a million pieces. Charlotte felt the world drop out from under her. The words were so much worse than a splash of cold water. They were an ice bath for her heart. The humiliation was absolute, far deeper than falling into a bathtub. She had believed in the man behind the billionaire, and he had just told her that man was a lie. Without a word, her chin trembling but held high, she turned and walked away. The next day she handed in her resignation, giving no reason, her heart a hollow, aching shell. She packed her small apartment, determined to start over in a new city, far from the golden cage and the man who had broken her heart. For Benjamin, his victory was his punishment. The silence of the golden house returned, but it was no longer just empty, it was accusing. The halls echoed with the ghost of her laughter. Every room was a monument to his loneliness. He sat at his vast empty dining table and realized that every single thing he owned, every painting, every sculpture, every stock and bond, was worthless if it cost him the one person who made him feel truly rich. The fear that had motivated him was replaced by a clear, cold certainty. He would rather lose every penny, every shred of his so-called reputation than lose her. He had spent his life building an empire, and he had almost let it destroy the only thing that truly mattered. He didn't call. He didn't send a car. Benjamin Croft, one of the most powerful men in the city, went to find her himself. He stood on the modest doorstep of her small apartment, watching through the screen door as she packed a cardboard box with her belongings. She looked up, her face pale and surprised, then hardened with hurt. Before she could speak, before she could tell him to leave, he began to talk. He didn't make excuses. He told her he was a coward. He told her about the ultimatum, about his fear, about the terrible, lonely silence that had descended upon him the moment she left. "They told me to choose between my world and you," he said, his voice raw with emotion, his carefully constructed composure gone. "And I was a fool. I thought I was protecting you. But I was wrong. So I am choosing now, Charlotte. I choose you. I don't care about the rules. I don't care about the board. I will walk away from all of it right now, this second, if it means I can be with you. I love you. It's you. It will always be you." The wall of hurt around Charlotte's heart crumbled, not all at once, but brick by brick, as she saw the truth in his eyes, not the cold billionaire, but the vulnerable, lonely man she had fallen in love with. The man who was risking everything, his entire world, for a chance at forever with her. The tears that finally fell were not of sadness, but of relief. She opened the screen door, and her yes was whispered into his shoulder as he held her, right there on her simple doorstep, a moment more valuable than any deal he had ever closed. Their forever did not look like the glossy pages of a magazine. Benjamin did step down from the daily pressures of his company, placing trusted people in charge while he retained ownership. They moved out of the Golden House, which was sold and turned into a public museum and gardens, a place he said should be filled with life and laughter, not just one man's solitude. They bought a smaller, sun-filled home with a large, wild garden for Charlotte to cultivate. Their love story, which began with a forbidden splash in a billionaire's bath, became a quiet legend, a testament to the fact that the greatest fortunes are not made of gold, but of the courage to follow your heart, no matter the cost. It was a story of two souls who found their way to each other against all odds, proving that true love is the only thing that truly lasts forever. If you were moved by Benjamin and Charlotte's journey from a shocking first meeting to a love that conquered every obstacle, then you won't want to miss what comes next. Our channel is dedicated to bringing you the most heartfelt and unforgettable romance stories. To make sure you never miss a single chapter of love, courage, and forever, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Your next favorite story is just a click away. The late afternoon sun, heavy and golden, poured itself over the grand estate of Oakhaven, but for Anne, it felt like the light was trapped behind thick glass. From her spot by the ornate window, the world outside was a beautiful picture she could not touch. She was a bird in a gilded cage, her life a series of predictable steps laid out by her parents, the final step being a marriage to Mr. Thompson, a man whose smile never reached his eyes and whose conversations were always about money and status. A deep, hollow loneliness had taken root inside her chest, a constant companion that even the finest dresses or most expensive jewels could not silence. Her only escape was the one place her family considered common, the stables. The air there was different, thick with the honest smells of hay, leather, and horse. It was real. On this particular day, the weight of her future felt heavier than usual, pressing down on her shoulders as she slipped away from the main house. The gravel of the path crunched softly under her thin-soled shoes, a small, satisfying sound of rebellion. She moved towards the paddock where the newest, most spirited horse, a sleek black creature named Midnight, was being exercised. Charles saw the world in terms of muscle, sweat, and trust. He understood horses in a way he never understood people in fine houses. His hands, though strong and calloused from work, were gentle as he ran a brush over Midnight's flank. He was so focused on calming the animal's restless energy that he didn't notice the figure in the pale yellow dress approaching the fence. He liked the simplicity of his work, the clear problem of a nervous animal and the straightforward solution of patience and a steady voice. It was a quiet life and he had accepted it. A sudden, sharp noise, a clatter of a bucket kicked over by a stable boy, shattered the calm. Midnight, already on edge, reared up with a frightened whinny, his powerful hooves cutting the air. The horse bolted, not towards the open field, but straight along the fence line, directly towards the distracted Anne who had turned at the sound. Charles moved without thought. It was not bravery but instinct. He lunged forward, his body a solid wall between the panicking animal and the young woman. He didn't shout but instead made a low, shushing sound, his hand shooting out to grab the dangling reins, his other arm held out to shield Anne. For a single, suspended moment the world stopped, and felt a rush of air and the sheer terrifying size of the horse. Then she felt the solid, unmovable presence of the man in front of her. The sleeve of his rough work shirt brushed against her arm. She could smell the clean scent of soap and hay on him. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but it was no longer just from fear. Charles, once he had a firm grip on the reins and had soothed Midnight with a steady murmur, turned to her. His eyes, a warm shade of brown like the earth after rain, were full of concern. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice deeper than she expected, roughened by a life outdoors. It was the first time anyone had looked at her with genuine worry in what felt like years. And could only shake her head, her words stuck in her throat. She was staring, she knew she was, but she couldn't stop. He was tall and broad, his face handsome in a rugged, unpolished way. I'm fine," she finally managed to whisper. "Thank you." He didn't let go of the reins, nor did he step away, creating a small, intimate space between them, the still agitated horse and the rest of the world. "You shouldn't stand so close to the fence when he's out," he said, not as a scolding, but as a quiet piece of advice. "He's got a nervous spirit." "I have a fondness for things with nervous spirits," Anne replied, the words leaving her lips before she could think to stop them. It was the most honest thing she had said all week. A slow, understanding smile touched Charles's lips. It transformed his entire face, making his eyes crinkle at the corners. "Then you two might get along just fine once he's learned some manners." That was how it began. Not with grand declarations, but with a shared moment of fright and a quiet comment about a horse's spirit. Their next meetings were not accidents. They were choices, and found more and more reasons to walk to the stables. Sometimes she would bring an apple, asking Charles how to properly offer it to a horse so her fingers wouldn't be mistaken for a treat. He would show her, his large, work-roughened hand gently guiding hers, the simple touch sending a jolt of warmth up her arm. He taught her the horses' names, not just the fancy ones her family used, but the names the stable hands called them. He spoke to her not as a lady to be placed on a pedestal, but as a person. He listened when she talked about the books she read, and he in turn told her stories about growing up in a small village by the sea, a world away from the manicured lawns of Oakhaven. They discovered a shared, hidden spot at the far edge of the garden, where a large, old willow tree's branches swept down to the ground like a green curtain. It was their secret world. Behind that curtain, the rules of the estate did not exist. She was no longer the daughter promised to Mr. Thompson, and he was no longer just the stable hand. He was Charles, the man who made her laugh with his dry wit. She was Anne, the woman whose eyes lit up when she talked about seeing the ocean one day. With every secret minute spent under the willow tree, the hollow loneliness inside her began to fill, replaced by a feeling so bright and warm it was almost frightening. It was a feeling they both knew was forbidden, a path they were walking that could only lead to trouble, but neither of them could bring themselves to turn back. The pull was too strong, the connection too real to ignore. The secret world behind the willow tree became the true center of their universe, a place where the sun seemed to shine with a softer, more private light and the very air felt different, charged with a quiet understanding that grew with every stolen moment. The initial, careful friendship between Anne and Charles began to transform, like a bud slowly unfurling into a full and breathtaking bloom. Their conversations, once filled with the simple facts of their lives, now dipped into the deep waters of their fears and their quietest hopes, and confessed her terror of the cold, lonely future that awaited her as Mr. Thompson's wife, a life where she would be little more than a beautiful painting on a wall, admired but never truly seen. Charles spoke of his own dreams, not of wealth or status, but of a small piece of land, a place where his work would be his own and his life would be built on his own terms, a concept that felt as distant and magical to Anne as any fairy tale. The space between them when they sat on their old, moss-covered bench grew smaller and smaller. A casual brush of her hand against his as she pointed to a bird no longer felt like an accident, but like a deliberate question. The answering warmth in his eyes was the only reply she needed. The air between them grew thick with all the things they had not yet said aloud, a language of lingering glances and hesitant smiles that spoke louder than any words could. The simple act of him tucking a stray piece of her hair behind her ear one breezy afternoon felt more intimate than any formal dance she had ever attended in the grand ballroom. It was a touch that was both a comfort and a promise, a silent acknowledgement of the invisible thread that was pulling them ever closer together. Then came the night of the full moon. The estate was blanketed in a deep, velvety silence, broken only by the distant call of an owl. Slipping away from the house felt more dangerous than ever, every creak of the floorboard a thunderous warning. But the need to see him, to be in the sanctuary of their world, was a physical ache in her chest. When she finally pushed through the curtain of willow branches, he was there, waiting. The moonlight dappled through the leaves, painting his face in shades of silver and shadow. He didn't speak. He simply looked at her, and in that look she saw everything she felt reflected back at her. The longing, the fear, the overwhelming, undeniable love. He closed the small distance between them, his hand coming up to cradle her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin with a reverence that made her breath catch. When his lips finally met hers, it was not a question but an answer. It was a slow, deep kiss that tasted of secrets and salvation, a kiss that sealed a silent vow and set her entire world ablaze with a feeling so right it erased every rule she had ever been taught. After that night, their meetings took on a new, feverish intensity. The risk of discovery was a constant, humming fear in the background, but it only made their time together more precious, more desperate. Every touch was memorized, every whispered word a treasure stored away against the bleak future they feared. Their love was a flame they were carefully guarding in a storm, and they knew a single strong wind could extinguish it forever. The simple, innocent closeness of before was now layered with a powerful physical need, a deep yearning to be as close as two people could possibly be, to erase all boundaries and become one. On a night when the air was warm and heavy with the scent of night-blooming jasmine, this yearning reached its peak. Hidden deep within their green bower, wrapped in the safety of the darkness and each other's arms, the world and its consequences fell completely away. There was only the feel of his strong hands, the solid warmth of his body, the sound of his breath mingling with hers. The layers of silk and linen that usually separated their worlds were gently set aside, not with haste, but with a slow, worshipful care that made her feel more cherished than any jewel ever could. As they came together, it was the most natural and the most extraordinary thing in the world. It was a little scary, this final step into the unknown, but the feeling of being so completely connected to him, soul and body, washed all the fear away, replacing it with a sense of profound rightness, of finally being home. In the quiet, breathless aftermath, wrapped in the secure circle of his arms, her head resting on his chest, she felt the truth of their situation press in on her. This perfect happiness was fragile. The thought of him pulling away, of this moment ending and the cold reality returning, was unbearable. She needed him to understand that this was not a fleeting secret for her, but the very core of her existence. She turned her face into his neck, her voice a soft, panting whisper against his skin, a plea from the deepest part of her soul. "Stay inside me fully." It was a prayer for him to remain in her heart, in her life, in this sacred space they had created forever. He understood her completely. He held her tighter, his arms a fortress around her. His voice was a low, possessive growl that vibrated through his chest and into her very bones, a sound of pure, unshakable truth. "Only you," he vowed. In those 2 words he promised her his past, his present, and his future. He was hers and she was his, and in that hidden world that was the only law that mattered. The golden, stolen days of summer could not last forever. The world outside the willow tree's protective curtain was changing. The air grew crisper, and with the turning of the leaves came a chilling announcement from Anne's family. Her wedding to Mr. Thompson was officially set for 1 month's time. The news hit their secret world like a physical blow, shattering the delicate peace they had built. The whispered conversations under the moon were now filled with frantic plans and desperate tears. The warm, languid touches were now clung to with a kind of frantic fear, each one feeling like it could be the last. The love that had once been their shelter was now a source of agonizing pain, a beautiful thing they were about to have torn from their grasp. Running away was a terrifying idea. It meant leaving behind everything Anne had ever known, her home, her family, any claim to comfort and security. For Charles, it meant risking everything, his job, his reputation, and his very freedom for the crime of loving a woman deemed too good for him. The plan they forged was a fragile one, built on hope more than certainty. They would take only what they could carry. Charles had saved a little money, enough for train tickets to a distant city where no one knew their names. They would leave in the deepest part of the night, a week before the wedding when the household was asleep. The plan was a thread, thin and liable to snap, but it was the only thread they had to cling to. The night of their escape arrived, heavy with a thick, cloudy darkness that hid the moon and stars. The estate was unnervingly silent, as if holding its breath. Anne's heart was a wild drum against her ribs as she moved through the shadowy halls, a small bag clutched in her trembling hand. Every sound, every creak of the old house, felt like a shout announcing her betrayal. She slipped out the servants' entrance, the cool night air doing nothing to calm her nerves. She moved like a ghost towards the stable where Charles was waiting, having prepared 2 horses for their journey. The plan was in motion. But their secret had not been as safe as they believed. A jealous stable hand, suspicious of Charles's late-night activities, had been watching. He had gone straight to Mr. Thompson, who saw not a tragedy of the heart, but a crime against his property. As Charles helped Anne onto her horse, his hand steadying hers, a blaze of lantern light suddenly flooded the stable yard, trapping them in its harsh glare. Mr. Thompson stood there, his face a mask of cold fury, flanked by Anne's father, who looked more stunned than angry, and her mother, whose hand was pressed to her mouth in shock. The confrontation was immediate and brutal. Mr. Thompson's voice was a whip-crack of accusation, calling Charles a thief and worse. He demanded that Charles be arrested immediately. This was the moment their love faced its ultimate test. It would have been easy for Charles to crumble, to bow his head and accept his fate. But he did not. He stood straighter, his hand still firmly holding Anne's, and looked not at his accusers, but directly into Anne's father's eyes. His voice, though quiet, carried across the yard with a power born of absolute truth. He spoke not of rebellion but of devotion. He confessed his love for Anne not as a servant for a lady, but as a man for the woman who was his entire world. He spoke of her laughter, her intelligence, her kind heart, and he vowed that he would spend every second of his life ensuring she knew she was loved and cherished. He was not stealing her away, he said. He was asking for the chance to build a life with her, a real life even if it was a humble one. While the men argued, Anne's mother watched her daughter. She saw the tears streaming down Anne's face, but she also saw the way and looked at Charles, not with the placid obedience expected of a wife, but with a fierce, unwavering love. She saw the way Anne's shoulders were squared, her chin lifted in a defiance she had never shown before. She remembered her own youth, her own quiet compromises, and the hollow space they had left inside her. In that moment she saw not a disobedient daughter, but a woman fighting for her soul. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the angry words. She placed a hand on her husband's arm and spoke not of scandal but of happiness. She asked him if he truly wanted to chain their daughter to a life of respectable misery, if a safe, loveless marriage was truly a better fate than a difficult, love-filled one. There was a long, tense silence. Anne's father looked from Mr. Thompson's smug, furious face to Charles's honest, desperate one, and finally to his daughter's, which was shining with a hope and a strength he had never seen there. the fight seemed to drain out of him. He could not, in the end, condemn his child to the same gilded cage he had helped to build. With a heavy sigh he nodded. The engagement to Mr. Thompson was broken. It was not a happy ending filled with celebration and approval. There were too many broken rules for that. Charles and Anne were given a choice. They could stay, but they would never be accepted, their love always a mark of shame in the eyes of their world. Or they could leave as they had planned, and face the uncertainty of a future they would have to build with their own hands. As the first light of dawn began to pink the sky, they made their choice. They mounted their horses not as fugitives but as pioneers of their own destiny. They rode away from Oakhaven not with a fortune, but with something far more valuable. They had each other. The road ahead was unknown and would undoubtedly be hard, but they faced it together, their hands clasped, their secret love now a bold declaration to the world. They had chosen their forever, and it was a forever that was entirely, beautifully their own. If you were moved by Anne and Charles's brave journey to find a love that was truly their own, a story of hearts choosing freedom over a gilded cage, then you can follow their path to many more tales of passion and defiance. Subscribe to the channel to be notified every time a new story of unforgettable romance unfolds. Your next favorite love story is waiting. The afternoon sun was a great, golden coin hanging in the vast, blue sky, pouring its warm, buttery light over the sprawling garden party. The air itself hummed with a gentle buzz, a mixture of cheerful voices, the soft clinking of glasses and the distant happy strains of music floating from a small band set up on the patio. Laughter erupted in little bursts from different groups of people who stood chatting, their faces bright and relaxed in the pleasant weather. It was a scene of perfect easy summer joy, a picture of happiness that anyone would have been glad to step into. But for a young woman named Isabella, who stood slightly apart from the main crowd, it felt like a world she was only watching from the outside. She had come to the party with a friend, but that friend had quickly been swept up into a circle of her own companions, leaving Isabella feeling a little bit like a boat that had been untied from its dock, drifting slowly and without direction at the edge of a lively shore. She smoothed down the simple pretty dress she had chosen with such care that morning, suddenly feeling its soft fabric under her nervous fingers as a small comfort. Her feet, almost as if they had a mind of their own, carried her away from the noise and the crowd, drawn towards a quieter, more beautiful part of the garden. It was a section dedicated entirely to roses, a place of intoxicating fragrance and stunning color. There were roses of every shade imaginable, from the purest, most delicate white to a deep velvety crimson that was almost black in the shadows. Isabella walked slowly along the neat gravel path that wound through the flower beds, her eyes wide with admiration. She reached out one hand, her fingers hovering just above the petals of a particularly perfect bloom, a soft pink one that was unfurled to the sun. She did not pick it, she never would, but instead she gently, so gently, traced the very edge of one silken petal with her fingertip, feeling its incredible softness and the tiny cool dampness from the air. In this quiet corner, surrounded by such natural beauty, the tight, nervous feeling in her chest began to loosen its grip, just a little. From across the lawn, a man named Raphael was taking a break from his own conversations. He had been talking with some old school friends, the conversation easy and familiar, but his gaze had kept wandering, again and again, back to the solitary figure moving among the roses. There was something about her that caught his eye and held it. It wasn't just that she was pretty, though she certainly was, with her thoughtful eyes and the way the sunlight caught in her hair. It was the quiet grace with which she moved, the deep, genuine attention she was giving to the flowers, as if each one held a secret she was trying to understand. She looked peaceful but also a little lonely, and the combination struck a chord deep within him. He found himself making a polite excuse to his friends, his feet already moving, carrying him on a path that felt both new and completely inevitable, straight towards the rose garden and the young woman standing in the middle of it. Isabella was so lost in her own world, in the simple pleasure of the flowers and their sweet smell, that she did not hear the soft crunch of footsteps on the gravel path approaching her. She jumped slightly, pulling her hand back from the rose as if she had been caught doing something she shouldn't, when a warm, calm voice spoke from just beside her. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" the voice said. She turned, her heart giving a sudden funny little thump in her chest, and found herself looking into the kindest pair of brown eyes she had ever seen. The man standing there, Raphael, was tall with a strong build, but his smile was gentle and his expression was open and friendly, without any of the boasting or loudness she sometimes saw in other men at parties. He wasn't looking at the roses, she realized with another flutter in her stomach. He was looking directly at her. For a moment, Isabella was too surprised to speak, Her words caught in her throat. She simply nodded, a quick, small movement. Raphael's smile widened just a little, creasing the corners of his eyes. "This pink one here," he said, gesturing to the very flower she had been touching. "It reminds me of the sky right before the sun rises in the winter. That soft, quiet kind of pink." His observation was so unexpected and so poetic that it broke through her shyness. That's exactly it," she said, her own voice coming out as a soft whisper. "I was just thinking how it looked like a watercolor painting." And with that, a connection, tiny and fragile as a spider's web, was spun between them right there in the garden. They began to talk. It started with the roses, of course, sharing which colors they each liked best. He preferred the bold, sunny yellow ones, he said, because they looked so happy. She admitted her favorite was the simple white rose, for its pure and clean scent. But their conversation quickly drifted, like a leaf carried on a gentle stream, to other things, small and large. They talked about the simple joy of the warm sun on their skin after a long, cold season. They talked about the comforting smell of rain on dry earth and how it was one of the best smells in the whole world. Isabella, who usually found it so hard to talk to new people, found the words flowing easily. She told him about her dream to one day have a small library of her own books, and he listened with genuine interest, not just polite nodding. He, in turn, told her about his hope to build things with his own hands, to create something solid and good that would last. As they spoke, the rest of the party seemed to fade away into a distant, blurry background. The loud laughter and the music became nothing more than a faint hum, a world away from the quiet little universe they were building for themselves on the gravel path. Isabella found herself laughing at a silly story he told about trying to build a birdhouse that all the birds refused to use, and the sound of her own laughter surprised her with its ease. She looked at Raphael, at the way his whole face lit up when he smiled, and she felt that warm butterfly feeling in her middle again, only this time it was stronger, a whole flock of them taking flight. He was so easy to be with. He made her feel interesting and heard and seen, not just as a person in a crowd, but as Isabella. Time, which had seemed to stand still while they talked, suddenly rushed forward as the golden afternoon light began to deepen into the orange and purple hues of evening. The sun was dipping low, painting long, soft shadows across the grass. A comfortable silence fell between them, the kind that isn't awkward or empty, but full and peaceful, like the quiet moments at the end of a perfect day. Raphael looked at Isabella, her face glowing in the twilight, and he knew he did not want this to be the end. He did not want her to be just a lovely chance meeting at a party that he would remember with a vague sense of fondness. He wanted to see her again. He took a small half-step closer, his voice dropping to a tone meant just for her. "Isabella," he said, and the sound of her name on his lips felt new and special, "would it be all right if I saw you again? Maybe we could go for a walk sometime? Just us." The question hung in the fragrant air between them. Isabella's breath caught. All the shyness she had felt at the beginning of the party tried to rise up again, but it was quickly washed away by a much stronger, warmer feeling of pure happiness. She looked up into his hopeful, earnest face, and her own face broke into a wide, genuine smile, the truest one she had smiled all day. "Yes," she said, and the word felt like a promise. "I would like that very much." As they turned to finally leave the rose garden, their hands, swinging lightly at their sides, brushed against each other. It was the briefest, most accidental touch, just a whisper of skin against skin. But Raphael, feeling a courage he didn't know he had, let his fingers gently curl around hers, holding her hand for just a moment in a warm, secure grasp. It wasn't a tight hold, it was a question and an answer. For Isabella, that simple touch sent a jolt of warmth straight up her arm and right to her heart, a feeling so bright and certain it made her head spin. She didn't pull away. She just let her hand rest in his for those few precious steps. And when he let go so they could rejoin the others, the ghost of his touch remained, a secret treasure pressed into her palm. That night, lying in her bed, Isabella closed her eyes and did not see a crowd of party guests or a garden of beautiful flowers. She saw only one thing, the kind, gentle brown eyes of Raphael, and she replayed the sound of his voice and the wonderful, safe warmth of his hand holding hers, over and over and over again until she fell asleep with a smile on her face. The day had dawned not with a blazing sun, but with a soft, pearly light that slowly illuminated a sky dotted with fluffy, gentle clouds. It was a day that seemed to hold its breath, a day of quiet significance that had been built from all the days that came before it. From that first meeting in the rose garden, through countless walks and shared conversations, through whispered secrets on park benches and laughter that echoed during simple dinners. All those moments, like individual threads, had been carefully woven together into the rich, beautiful tapestry of this single momentous day, the day Isabella would become Raphael's wife and he her husband. The air in the small flower-adorned chapel was thick with the sweet scent of lilies and gardenias, and every seat was filled with the warm, smiling faces of those who had come to witness the joining of two souls. When the music began to swell, a hush fell over the gathering, and all eyes turned to the back of the room. There, standing in the doorway, was Isabella, a vision in a simple, elegant gown that seemed to glow in the soft light, her eyes fixed on Raphael, who waited for her at the end of the aisle with a look of such pure, overwhelming love that it brought tears to more than a few eyes. The walk towards him felt to Isabella both like an eternity and the passing of a single heartbeat, a journey from her past into her future, and when her hand finally slipped into his, she felt not an ending, but the most profound beginning. The ceremony was a blur of heartfelt words and promised futures. They spoke their vows to one another, their voices steady and sure, each word a brick being laid in the foundation of the life they were vowing to build together. The exchange of rings was a cool, smooth weight, a permanent circle of commitment. When they were finally pronounced husband and wife, and Raphael leaned in to seal their promises with a kiss, it was not a kiss of fiery passion, but one of deep, abiding tenderness, a silent vow in itself that spoke of protection, honor, and a love that had found its home. The celebration that followed was a whirlwind of joy, of clinking glasses, of heartfelt toasts from friends and family, of a first dance where they seemed to be the only two people in the room, moving to a music that only they could hear. They laughed and ate cake and held hands under the table, their fingers laced together as if they were never meant to be parted. As the evening drew to a close and the last of the guests departed with waves and well wishes, a new kind of quiet began to descend, a private, intimate quiet that belonged only to them. They arrived at the cozy room that had been prepared for them, a space filled with the soft glow of lamplight and the lingering romantic energy of the day. It was in this new quiet that Isabella's earlier certainty began to gently tremble, like a leaf in a soft breeze. The monumental nature of the day, the finality of the step they had taken, and the undeniable newness of what was to come next began to settle upon her. Standing in the middle of the room, still in her beautiful dress, she felt a sudden, familiar shyness return, wrapping around her like a fine mist. This was all so new, so unknown. She had given Raphael her heart completely, but her body, her own self, had never been known by anyone before, and the thought of that vulnerability made her hands feel cold and her heart beat a nervous rhythm against her ribs. Raphael, who had been watching her with a heart so full he thought it might burst, saw the subtle change in her posture, the slight uncertainty in her beautiful eyes. He understood in an instant. He moved towards her not with haste or demand, but with the same gentle deliberateness with which he had first approached her in the garden. He stopped in front of her, his presence a calm and steady anchor in the room. He did not reach for her dress or try to fill the silence with empty words. Instead, he simply took both of her hands in his thumbs stroking gentle, soothing circles on her skin. He waited until her nervous eyes met his and he held her gaze, letting her see the entirety of his love for her, a love that was patient and kind. Looking deep into her eyes, seeing the trust she was placing in him and the flicker of fear she was trying to brave, Raphael knew the most important words he would ever speak were needed now. His voice, when it came, was low and soft, a hushed and intimate sound in the quiet room, yet every syllable was clear and weighted with absolute sincerity. "Isabella," he began, her name a caress on his lips. "I will be gentle and take it slow." The promise was simple, but it was everything. It was not just a statement about the physical act to come, it was a vow for their entire life together. It was a promise to always honor her feelings, to cherish her trust, to value her heart above all else. Those few words, spoken with such profound love and understanding, acted like a key turning in a lock deep inside her. The tight knot of anxiety in her chest loosened and then melted away, replaced by a warm, flowing sense of safety and absolute trust. The fear retreated, not banished by force, but gently soothed away by the certainty of his love. What followed was not a frantic rush, but a slow, tender exploration, a beautiful and silent conversation spoken with hands and lips and whispered breaths. It was a journey of discovery, where every touch was a question and every sigh an answer. Raphael was true to his word. His hands and his lips were infinitely gentle, his movements patient and guided by her every soft gasp and quiet murmur. He learned the landscape of her, not as a conqueror, but as a pilgrim arriving at a sacred place, with reverence and awe. For Isabella, The experience was transformed from something she had feared into the most natural and beautiful extension of the love they had already declared to the world. The slight, initial discomfort was fleeting, quickly washed away by a rising tide of a new, profound connection, a spicy, deep warmth that started in her core and spread outwards, making her feel more alive, more known, and more loved than she had ever thought possible. It was the final, physical weaving together of their two separate lives into one inseparable whole. Later, as the night deepened and the room was dark, they lay tangled together in the soft sheets, their limbs intertwined, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. His arms were wrapped around her, a protective, loving circle that made her feel both safe and cherished. In the warm, contented silence, under the blanket of a sky filled with stars, they drifted into sleep, not as two separate people who had gotten married, but as one soul, finally and completely united, their dreams merging into a single, peaceful vision of the forever they had just begun. The golden promise of that first night did not fade with the morning sun. Instead, it wove itself into the very fabric of their days, becoming the quiet, steady rhythm of their shared life. The intense, sparkling newness of their wedding day softened, not into something dull, but into something far more valuable and strong. A deep, abiding comfort that was like a warm, well-worn sweater on a chilly day. They moved into a small house with a garden that needed love, and together, with dirt under their fingernails and sweat on their brows, they planted not just flowers and herbs, but the seeds of their future. Mornings were no longer solitary affairs but a shared ritual of sleep-softened voices and the rich smell of coffee brewing in a pot they had chosen together. Their kitchen became the heart of their home, a place often messy and always full of life, where they learned each other's culinary quirks, his surprising talent for burning toast, her patient way of teaching him how to properly chop an onion without crying. They built a library shelf by shelf, just as Isabella had dreamed, filling it with stories that they would read aloud to each other on quiet winter evenings, their voices a soft murmur in the cozy room. Life, of course, was not always a perfect, sun-drenched garden. There were storms that tested the strength of the roots they had put down. There were difficult days when work was demanding and patience wore thin, when misunderstandings clouded the air like a sudden fog. But the memory of that gentle promise, "I will be gentle," became their guide. It was a promise that extended far beyond the intimacy of their bedroom. It became the principle of their entire marriage. It meant choosing kind words over sharp ones when they were tired. It meant listening to understand, not just to reply when they disagreed. It meant holding space for each other's bad days, offering a silent hug or a warm cup of tea, a quiet assurance that they were a team, a safe harbor for one another no matter how rough the seas outside became. Their love proved itself not in the grand dramatic gestures, but in these thousands of small daily choices to be gentle, to be patient, to be present. Years flowed by, each one adding a new layer to the story of Raphael and Isabella. One of the most profound chapters began on a day when Isabella discovered she was carrying their child. The joy that filled their home was a tangible thing, a new kind of light. Raphael's care for her became even more tender, his hands always ready to support her, his voice full of wonder as he felt their baby move. The day their daughter was born was a day of messy, miraculous, and overwhelming love. In the hushed stillness of the hospital room, Isabella held their tiny, perfect child in her arms, feeling a love so fierce and powerful it stole her breath. Raphael wrapped his strong arms around both of them, his eyes glistening with tears of pure joy as he looked at his wife, the brave, strong, beautiful mother of his child, and their new daughter. In that moment he was transported back through the years, seeing the shy young woman in the garden, the radiant bride on their wedding night, and now this incredible, life-giving force. His heart swelled with a pride and a love so vast it felt infinite. He had built a home with his hands, but with Isabella he had built a family, a legacy of love. Their daughter grew, and their love grew with her, stretching and expanding to fill the house with laughter, scraped knees, and bedtime stories. They taught her about kindness by being kind to each other. They showed her what commitment looked like by honoring theirs every single day. And then one evening on the occasion of their 10th anniversary, they found a rare moment of quiet. Their daughter was sleeping peacefully upstairs and the house was still. Soft moonlight streamed through the window, painting silver patterns on the floor. Without a word, Raphael stood and held out his hand to Isabella. She took it and he drew her into his arms and they began to sway, dancing to a silent music that only their hearts could hear, right there in their living room, amidst the scattered toys and well-loved furniture. He held her close, her head resting on his shoulder, just as it had on their first night as husband and wife. He leaned his head close to hers, his breath warm against her ear, and whispered the words that had been the foundation of it all, the words that had built their forever. "I will always be gentle with your heart." Isabella closed her eyes, a single happy tear tracing a path down her cheek as she melted into his embrace. She knew with a certainty as deep as the ocean that it was true. Their love story was not a fleeting flash of lightning, but the constant, reliable warmth of the sun. It was built on a promise made in the soft light of a wedding chamber, a promise that had been kept and would be kept for all the days of their lives. It was and always would be there forever. We hope you cherished the journey of Raphael and Isabella. If this story of gentle promises and enduring love touched your heart, there are countless more tales waiting to be told. Subscribe to our channel to be the first to discover new worlds of romance, adventure, and heartfelt connections. Your next favorite story is just a click away.